In 1929, the stock market crashed 89%. In 2008, housing collapsed 57%. But in 2025, we're facing something the world has never witnessed all. Three pillars of the global economy are crashing simultaneously. Stocks, real estate, and government bonds are all in free fall together. This isn't just another market correction. This is the everything bubble popping, and when it goes, there's literally nowhere to hide. Let me show you why this time is fundamentally different from any crisis in modern history. Start with the stock market. The S&P 500 is trading at a price-to-earnings ratio of 28, nearly double the historical average. This level of insanity has only happened twice before, in 1929, right before the Great Depression, and in 2000. Right before the dot-com crash vaporized 78% of the Nasdaq's value. Both times, the market imploded within months. But 2025 is actually more dangerous than 1929. Back then, the market was concentrated in a handful of industrial stocks. Today, we have what Wall Street calls the Magnificent Seven: Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Google, Meta, and Tesla. These 7 companies alone represent 30% of the entire S&P 500's total value. If they fall, they're taking the entire market down with them. Look at Nvidia. The company trades at 65 times earnings, meaning investors are paying $65 for every single dollar of profit. Let that sink in. Nvidia's total market value exceeds $3 trillion. That's more than the entire German stock market. The 4th largest economy on Earth is worth less than a single company betting on AI hype. This isn't rational investing. This is pure speculation that mirrors the internet mania of 1999. Everyone believes AI will change everything, just like everyone believed the internet would change everything in 1999. They were right about the long-term impact, but catastrophically wrong about short-term valuations. The exact same madness is happening right now. But stocks are only the beginning. The second bubble, real estate, is actually more overvalued than the 2008 housing crisis that nearly destroyed global capitalism. Today, home prices are 50% above their long-term historical trend relative to income and rent. At the peak of the 2008 bubble, homes were only 35% overvalued. Let me repeat that. The current housing bubble is 43% larger than the one that triggered the Great Recession. And most people don't even realize we're in a bubble because prices have been high for so long it feels normal. But residential real estate is only half the story. Commercial real estate is in free fall. Office buildings across America sit 45% empty as remote work becomes permanent. San Francisco has 35% vacancy rates. These buildings were financed with mortgages at 3% interest. Now those mortgages are coming due and need to be refinanced at 7 to 9%. The math doesn't work. The buildings can't support triple the interest payments. This means defaults, bank losses, and a cascade of failures that will mirror the 2008 subprime crisis, but in commercial properties instead of residential. Now for the third bubble, the one that makes 2025 truly unprecedented, government bonds have always been the safe haven. In 1929, bonds were safe while stocks collapsed. In 2008, Treasury bonds rallied as investors fled to safety. But in 2025, bonds are crashing alongside stocks. Why? Because the U.S. government has issued so much debt that the bond market can't absorb it anymore. Total federal debt exceeds $36 trillion. That's 125% of GDP. The annual interest payment alone is over $1.2 trillion, making it the single largest line item in the federal budget. Bigger than defense, bigger than Social Security. When interest payments consume everything, the government has 3 choices, all of them: cut spending and cause a recession, raise taxes and cause a recession, or print money and cause hyperinflation. There are no good options left. This is the everything bubble. Stocks at valuations only seen before crashes. Real estate more overvalued than 2008. And bonds, the traditional safe haven, collapsing under the weight of unpayable government debt. 3 bubbles, all inflated to historic extremes, all popping at the same time. This has never happened in financial history, and that's exactly why 2025 will be worse than 1929 and 2008 combined. What if I told you that the entire fate of the U.S. stock market, and, by extension, the global economy, now rests on just 7 companies? 7 stocks that have become so large, so dominant, that their failure would trigger a financial avalanche unlike anything we've ever seen. Welcome to the era of the Magnificent Seven: Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Google, Meta, and Tesla. These aren't just successful companies. They've become the pillars holding up the entire temple of modern finance. Together, they represent 30% of the entire S&P 500's total market value. To understand how insane this is, consider this. In 1929, at the peak before the Great Depression, the top 7 companies represented less than 15% of the market. This concentration creates a fragility that's unprecedented in financial history. It means that if these 7 stocks stumble, they don't just fall, they take the entire market down with them. The S&P 500 isn't a diversified index anymore. It's a leveraged bet on 7 technology companies. Let's look at Nvidia, the poster child of this insanity. The company trades at a price-to-earnings ratio of 65. For every dollar of profit Nvidia makes, investors are paying $65. Compare that to the historical average of 15 to 17, and you start to understand the level of speculation we're dealing with. But the real shock comes when you look at Nvidia's total valuation. At over $3 trillion, Nvidia is worth more than the entire German stock market. Think about that. Germany is the 4th largest economy in the world, home to industrial giants like Volkswagen, Siemens, and Bayern. All of it combined is worth less than a single company betting on AI chips. This isn't just overvaluation. This is financial madness that makes the dot-com bubble look conservative. In 2000, the most overvalued tech companies traded at 40 to 50 times earnings. Today, Nvidia trades at 65 times earnings, and investors are still piling in. The AI hype cycle has created a feedback loop of insanity. Everyone believes AI will change everything, and they're probably right in the long term. But that is exactly what people said about the internet in 1999. They were right about the internet's long-term impact, but catastrophically wrong about short-term valuations. Companies like Pets.com and Webvan became symbols of the dot-com crescendo. They were trading at lower valuations than today, SAI darlings, but Nvidia is just one piece of the puzzle. Look at Tesla, trading at 70 times earnings despite growing competition and shrinking profit margins. Or Amazon at 50 times earnings with growth slowing dramatically. Or Apple, whose iPhone sales have plateaued while its valuation continues to soar. The Magnificent Seven aren't just overvalued, they're interconnected in ways that create systemic risk. They're each other's biggest customers, each other's largest cloud providers, each other's primary partners. If one falls, it doesn't fall alone. It pulls the others down with it. This concentration risk is made worse by the passive investing revolution. Trillions of dollars have flowed into index funds that automatically buy these stocks regardless of valuation. When everyone is buying the same 7 stocks, you get this kind of dangerous concentration. And when the selling starts, everyone will be selling the same 7 stocks too. The smart money is already getting out. Jeff Bezos has sold over $13 billion of Amazon stock. Mark Zuckerberg is dumping Meta shares. Nvidia executives are cashing out, even as the stock hits new highs. Warren Buffett is sitting on $325 billion in cash, the highest cash position in Berkshire Hathaway's history. These insiders see what's coming. In 1929, it was the industrial giants. In 2000, it was the dot-com stocks. In 2025, it's the Magnificent Seven. The names change, but the pattern remains the same. Extreme concentration, insane valuations, and the inevitable collapse that follows. When this house of cards falls, it won't be a normal market correction. It will be a collapse of the very foundation of the modern stock market. And because 58% of American households now own stocks compared to just 10% in 1929, the pain will be felt by everyone, not just the wealthy elite. The Magnificent Seven have become too magnificent for their own good, and their fall will be just as spectacular as their rise. What if I told you the current real estate bubble makes the 2008 housing crisis look conservative? That the very foundation of the American dream has become a financial time bomb ticking louder than anything we saw during the Great Recession. Let's start with the numbers that should terrify every homeowner and renter in America. Today, home prices are approximately 50% above their long-term historical trend relative to income and rent. Now compare that to 2008 ATAD, the peak of the housing madness that nearly destroyed global capitalism. homes were only 35% overvalued. Do the math. The current housing bubble is 43% larger than the one that triggered the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. The crisis that required trillions in bailouts, destroyed millions of jobs, and wiped out retirement accounts. That was the small bubble. But here's what makes this even more dangerous. Most people don't even realize we're in a bubble anymore. Prices have been high for so long that this feels normal. We've become frogs in boiling water, not noticing the temperature rising until it's too late. The psychology is different this time, too. In 2008, we had subprime borrowers, people who never should have gotten loans in the first place. Today, we have prime borrowers stretching themselves to the absolute limit. Doctors, engineers, teachers, people with good jobs taking on mortgages that consume 50%, 60%, even 70% of their take-home pay. They're not irresponsible, they're desperate, priced out of the market for a decade, and finally jumping in at the worst possible time. But residential real estate is only half the story. The real danger, the silent killer lurking in the shadows, is commercial real estate. Office buildings across America sit 45% vacant. In cities like San Francisco, the vacancy rate hits 35%. Think about that. 1 out of every 3 office spaces is empty. And this isn't temporary. Remote work has become permanent for millions of Americans. Now comes the refinancing wall. These buildings were financed with mortgages when interest rates were 3%. Today, those mortgages are coming due and need to be refinanced at 7 to 9%. The math is brutal and unforgiving. A building that barely cash flowed at 3% interest is bankrupt at 8%. But the rental income can't cover the debt service. Owners are facing a simple choice: pour millions into properties that will never be profitable again, or walk away and hand the keys to the bank. We're already seeing the smart money run for the exits. Brookfield Asset Management defaulted on 2 Los Angeles office towers in 2024. Blackstone, the world's largest commercial real estate owner, is struggling with redemption requests from investors who want their money back. These aren't amateurs, these are the most sophisticated players in the game, and they're cutting their losses. The regional banks are holding the bag. While everyone was watching the big Wall Street banks, regional banks loaded up on commercial real estate debt. Now they're facing losses that could wipe out their capital. Silicon Valley Bank was just a warning shot. Dozens more regional banks are sitting on commercial real estate portfolios that are about to implode. But wait, it gets worse. The commercial real estate collapse creates a vicious cycle that feeds back into residential real estate. Empty offices mean downtown businesses fail. Failed businesses mean laid-off workers. Laid-off workers can't pay their mortgages, and suddenly the residential bubble starts deflating too. Then there's the tax problem. Commercial properties account for a huge portion of city tax revenues. As values collapse and owners default, cities lose their funding. That means cuts to police, fire departments, schools, and infrastructure. The very services that make cities livable start disappearing, accelerating the urban death spiral. The scale is staggering. Over $2 trillion in commercial mortgages come due between 2025 and 2026. That's not just a problem for wealthy investors, that's a problem for every American with a bank account, a pension fund, or a job. Because when commercial real estate collapses, it doesn't collapse in isolation. It takes down banks. It takes down city budgets. It takes down small businesses that rely on office workers. It's a cascade of failures that makes the 2008 subprime crisis look orderly by comparison. The real estate trap is set: residential prices at unsustainable levels, commercial properties facing mass defaults, and a banking system that's completely unprepared for the shock. When this goes, it won't be a correction, it will be a collapse that makes 2008 look like a dress rehearsal. For generations, government bonds have been the ultimate safe haven, the place you park your money when storms hit the stock market, the asset class that never fails until now. What we're witnessing in 2025 is the unthinkable, the collapse of the very foundation of the global financial system. Let's start with the number that changes everything: $36 trillion. That's the current U.S. federal debt figure, so large it's almost meaningless to most people. But here's what makes it dangerous. It represents 125% of America's entire economic output. The last time we saw debt levels this high was 1946, after World War II. But there's a crucial difference. After World War II, America was the only major industrial power left standing. Europe was in ruins, Japan was destroyed, and the United States emerged as the undisputed global leader. Today, America is competing with China, Europe, and emerging markets all, while carrying debt levels that would have been unthinkable just a generation ago. Now comes the real crisis, the interest payments. The U.S. government now spends over $1.2 trillion annually just to service the existing debt. Let that number sink in. $1.2 trillion, that's more than the entire defense budget, more than Social Security. It's the single largest line item in the federal budget, and it's growing exponentially. When interest payments consume this much of the budget, the government faces three choices and all of them lead to economic disaster. Option 1, cut spending dramatically. Defense, eviscerate Social Security, gut Medicare. This would immediately trigger a deep recession, as government spending, a huge driver of economic growth, vanishes overnight. Option 2, raise taxes massively. Increase taxes on individuals, on businesses, on investments. This would crush consumer spending and business investment, guaranteeing the recession you were trying to avoid. Option 3, print money. Have the Federal Reserve create trillions out of thin air to pay the bills. This is the inflation nuclear option, the one that destroys currencies and wipes out savings. There are no good choices left, only varying degrees of catastrophe. But the bond market crisis goes deeper than just government debt. The entire structure of global finance is built on U.S. Treasury bonds being the risk-free asset. They're the collateral for everything from complex derivatives to simple bank loans. They're what central banks hold as reserves. They're the foundation that everything else is built upon. And that foundation is cracking. Look at what happened in 1929. When stocks crashed, bonds rallied as investors fled to safety. In 2008, the same pattern held Treasury bonds were the life raft in the storm. But in 2025, both stocks and bonds are sinking together. There's no life raft, no safe harbor, nowhere to hide. The reason is simple. The U.S. government needs to issue trillions in new bonds, just to refinance existing debt and cover current deficits. But who's going to buy them? Foreign governments like China and Japan are reducing their treasury holdings, not increasing them. The Federal Reserve is already holding trillions. They can't realistically buy much more without triggering hyperinflation. This creates a doom loop that's almost impossible to escape. As the government issues more bonds, supply overwhelms demand. Prices fall, yields rise. Higher yields mean even higher interest payments on the debt, which requires issuing even more bonds. It's a vicious cycle that ends in either default or currency destruction. The bond market isn't some abstract concept for Wall Street professionals. It affects you directly. When bond yields spike, mortgage rates follow. Car loans become unaffordable. Business loans dry up. The entire credit system, the lifeblood of the modern economy, seizes up. What makes 2025 different from every previous crisis is that all the traditional escape routes are closed. In 2008, the Fed could cut rates from 5.25% to 0. In 2025, rates are already low. In 2008, the government could borrow to fund bailouts. In 2025, the debt burden is already crushing. We've exhausted the tools, we've maxed out the credit cards, we've used up all the tricks. The bond market was supposed to be the safe haven, the place you could always run when danger appeared. But in 2025, the safe haven has become the danger. And when the last refuge fails, there's literally nowhere left to run. Imagine the Federal Reserve as a fire department that's run out of water, with hoses that have sprung leaks, and a town that's already burning from multiple directions. This is exactly the position America's central bank finds itself in as we approach the 2025 crisis, armed with tools that worked in previous fires but are useless against the inferno we now face. Let's rewind to 2008. When the housing market collapsed, the Fed had powerful weapons in its arsenal. Interest rates stood at 5.25%, plenty of room to cut all the way to 0. And cut they did, slashing rates to historic lows in a desperate bid to stimulate borrowing and spending. But that was just the beginning. The Fed then deployed its secret weapon, quantitative easing. They created trillions of dollars out of thin air and used it to buy government bonds and mortgage-backed securities. Their balance sheet exploded from $800 billion to $4.5 trillion. This unprecedented money printing saved the system, but planted the seeds for the crisis we face today. Now fast forward to 2025, the Fed's interest rates are already historically low. There's no room to cut significantly without going negative, a move that would shatter confidence in the entire banking system. The Fed's balance sheet stands at over $7 trillion, so bloated that any significant expansion risks triggering hyperinflation. The Fed is trapped in what economists call a policy trilemma. They can't fight inflation, maintain economic growth, and preserve financial stability simultaneously. Every move they make solves one problem while making two others worse. Cut rates to save the stock market. Inflation comes roaring back. Raise rates to fight inflation. The everything bubble pops. Stand still and do nothing. The system collapses under its own weight. But the Fed's problems run deeper than just exhausted tools. They've lost something even more precious: credibility. After 15 years of creating bubble after bubble, the market no longer trusts the Fed to manage the economy. When the Fed speaks, investors don't hear wisdom. They hear the desperate reassurances of an arsonist who keeps claiming the fire is under control. Look at the track record. After the 2008 crisis, the Fed kept rates too low for too long, inflating the everything bubble. Then they raised rates too aggressively in 2022 to 2023, breaking things while inflation remained stubbornly high. Now they're stuck, unable to cut without unleashing inflation, unable to hike without crashing the economy. The Fed's traditional playbook assumes they're fighting one fire at a time: a stock market crash, a housing collapse, a banking crisis. But in 2025, all these fires are burning simultaneously. The tools designed for contained fires are useless against a financial wildfire. Even if the Fed could print more money, everyone now understands the consequences. The 2021 to 2023 inflation surged, the worst in 40 years, proved that you can't create unlimited money without destroying the currency's purchasing power. The magic of money printing has been exposed as an illusion. The government can't bail out the system either. In 2008, federal debt was 67% of GDP, manageable by historical standards. The $700 billion TARP program, while controversial, was economically feasible. Today, with debt at 125% of GDP and trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see, there's no fiscal capacity for another bailout. The international safety net has vanished too. In 2008, China was booming and helped pull the global economy out of recession. Europe, while wounded, could still contribute to coordinated rescue efforts. Today, China faces its own real estate collapse and demographic crisis. Europe struggles with energy shortages and political fragmentation. There are no healthy economies left to play rescue. The Fed isn't just out of ammunition, they're surrounded with reinforcements nowhere in sight. The traditional playbook has been burned, the emergency tools are broken, and the cavalry isn't coming. When the everything bubble pops in 2025, the Fed will be revealed as the emperor with no clothes, a powerful institution rendered helpless by the very crises it helped create. The fire department will watch the town burn, knowing that every tool they reach for will only make the flames higher. Beneath the surface of the visible financial markets lies a hidden world of risk, so vast, so interconnected, that it makes the 2008 crisis look like a minor disturbance. Welcome to the derivatives marketer, $600 trillion invisible time bomb that could turn the 2025 crash into a global financial extinction event. Let's start with a number that defies comprehension: $600 trillion. That's the notional value of the global derivatives market. To put that in perspective, the entire world's GDP is only $100 trillion. This market is 6 times larger than everything every country on Earth produces in a year, and most people have never even heard of it. Derivatives aren't inherently evil. They're financial contracts that derive their value from something else: interest rates, currencies, stock indexes. Used properly, they help companies hedge risks. But in 2025, they've become weapons of mass financial destruction. The most dangerous derivatives are interest rate swaps and credit default swaps. These are essentially insurance policies on interest rate movements and corporate defaults. The problem? There is not enough real money in the entire global financial system to pay out if these contracts are triggered simultaneously. Here's how the dominoes could fall. Let's say rising interest rates cause a major corporation to default on its debt. That triggers credit default swaps, the insurance policies against default. The companies that sold this insurance now have to pay up. But if too many defaults happen at once, these insurers can't cover the claims. This isn't theoretical. We saw a mini version in 2008 when AIG, one of the world's largest insurance companies, almost collapsed because it could uncover its credit default swap obligations. The government had to bail them out with $182 billion. But in 2025, there are dozens of AIGs, and the government doesn't have the money to save them. The leverage in the system is staggering. In 2008, investment banks like Lehman Brothers were leveraged 30-1. Today, through derivatives, some institutions have effective leverage ratios of 100-1 or even higher. They're betting $100 for every $1 they actually have. When those bets go wrong, the losses multiply at lightning speed. What makes 2025 different is the interconnectedness. In 2008, the crisis was concentrated in mortgage-backed securities. Today, derivatives link every market to every other market. A problem in Chinese real estate can trigger losses in American pension funds. A collapse in European banks can wipe out Asian insurance companies. There are no isolated failures anymore. The trigger could be anything: a major tech company missing earnings, a regional bank failure, a geopolitical shock. But once the cascade begins, it becomes self-reinforcing. Forced selling triggers more forced selling. Margin calls led to fire sales. Fire sales drive prices lower, triggering more margin calls. The scariest part? Much of this activity happens in the shadows. Over-the-counter derivatives aren't traded on public exchanges. They're private contracts between institutions. There's no transparency, no central clearing, no way to know who's exposed to whom until it's too late. We got a warning shot in 2020 during the COVID crash. The Federal Reserve had to intervene in the Treasury market because even supposedly safe government bonds were becoming illiquid. The plumbing of the entire financial system started to seize up. While Wall Street has been obsessed with stocks and bonds, a silent crisis has been brewing on Main Street, one that makes the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis look contained. The American consumer, once the engine of the global economy, has become a walking debt bomb waiting to explode. Let's start with the number that should keep every economist awake at night: $1.14 trillion. That's the total credit card debt in American all-time record. But the real horror isn't the amount, it's the interest rates. The average credit card now carries an interest rate of 21 to 28%. Families are paying nearly a third of their income just in credit card interest. The statistics get more frightening the deeper you look. The unemployment numbers are beginning to whisper what the stock market has been screaming for months. From a low of 3.4% in early 2023, unemployment has quietly climbed to 4.1% by October 2025. While this might sound manageable, it's the direction that matters, not the absolute number. And right now, every indicator suggests we're at the edge of the most devastating employment collapse since the Great Depression. Let me introduce you to the Sam Rula, simple but terrifyingly accurate predictor of recessions, developed by economist Claudia Sam. It states that when the 3-month moving average of the unemployment rate rises 0.5 percentage points above its low of the previous 12 months, the economy has already entered a recession. This indicator has predicted every recession since 1970 with perfect accuracy. As of October 2025, we're brushing against this threshold. But why is the employment situation in 2025 so much more dangerous than previous crises? Because the triggers are everywhere and the safety nets are gone. Start with the technology sector. During the boom years, tech companies became bloated with employees hired for projects that may never generate profits. Now, as the everything bubble deflates, these companies are facing a reality check. We're already seeing the early waves, 10 to 20% layoffs at major tech firms. But this is just the beginning. When the Magnificent Seven stocks collapse, the layoffs will become bloodbaths. Then there's the finance sector. Wall Street banks and regional lenders are sitting on commercial real estate portfolios that are about to implode. When those losses materialize, the layoffs won't be measured in thousands, they'll be measured in hundreds of thousands. And unlike 2008, there won't be government bailouts to save these jobs. But the real employment apocalypse will hit the service sector. When consumers stop spending because they're drowning in debt, restaurants, retail stores, and service businesses will collapse by the tens of thousands. These aren't just statistics. They're the backbone of American employment, representing millions of jobs that can disappear almost overnight. What makes 2025 uniquely dangerous is the speed at which this will unfold. In previous recessions, job losses accumulated over quarters. In the digital age, with algorithmic trading and instant communication, the collapse will happen in weeks. Companies that were profitable in October could be bankrupt by Christmas. The unemployment surge will create a vicious feedback loop that accelerates the crisis. Laid-off workers stop spending. Reduced spending forces more layoffs. More layoffs mean more defaults on auto loans, credit cards, and mortgages. These defaults trigger bank failures, which cause more layoffs. Within 3 months of the crash starting, unemployment could easily reach 7 to 8%. Within 6 months, 10% becomes realistic. Within a year, we could be looking at 12 to 15% unemployment levels not seen since the 1930s. But the employment crisis in 2025 has a terrifying new dimension: the destruction of retirement wealth. With 58% of American households owning stocks compared to just 10% in 1929, the market collapse will wipe out retirement savings for millions of older workers. These people can't just wait for recovery, they need to keep working, but there won't be jobs for them. The generational impact will be devastating. College graduates in 2026 to 2027 will enter the worst job market in modern history. Studies show that people who graduate during recessions earn less their entire careers. This won't be a temporary setback. It'll be a permanent scar on an entire generation. Small businesses, which employ nearly half of all Americans, will be particularly vulnerable. Without access to credit and with consumers disappearing, many won't survive. The economic landscape that emerges will be dominated by massive corporations, with competition and innovation suffering for a decade or more. The employment collapse won't just be an economic statistic, it will be a human catastrophe. The social safety net, already strained by decades of underfunding, will be completely overwhelmed. Unemployment benefits will run out. Food banks will be empty. The human suffering will be unimaginable. In 1929, it took years for unemployment to peak. In 2025, thanks to our interconnected, leveraged, and fragile economic system, the employment collapse will be faster, deeper, and more devastating than anything we've ever seen. The warning signs are there. The only question is whether we're prepared to face the consequences.